Okay, while Cody's finishing that, we'll go ahead and get started. Let's see. Okay, Stephanie, you're here. So I hope Chelsea can join us. So what I'd like to do is start off with questions from last week. We talked last week about nonverbal communication, and you all posted your discussions about nonverbal communication styles in your own. So do you have any questions or comments from last week?
Not really.
Well, what I would really like to do at this point is actually discuss that discussion with you, because there were some very interesting posts, and there was a really good set of discussions that I was pleased to see, where people were being very supportive of each other. So that was nice to see. That's the purpose of these discussions. But in light of responses that you've all received from your posts, I'd like you to discuss what you may have learned from those responses. And who wants to start that off? I can take volunteers, or I can start at the top of the roster. Oh boy, a real volunteering group here.
They're all speaking up at once.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll say something. It's not much, but
Thank you.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I just thought it was kind of interesting to learn that I don't project the image that I do desire, and ways to learn how to change it and notice the image I'm giving off at times. I just thought that was kind of cool to learn that and to start paying attention to that.
Yes. That's nice to hear, because I think several people noted that they had some strategies that they might give, that they might try to change. The part of the reason we have this discussion is so that actually we can get some idea from others how we come across, because we're not the best judge of that. It requires that we step outside ourselves, and that is very, very difficult to do. And anyone who says it's easy has never really tried it.
He's a liar.
Pardon?
Nothing.
So, but thank you, Stephanie. I did appreciate the fact that you looked and had a strategy to try. That was good. Who's next? Now that Stephanie has broken the ice. Okay, Amber.
So I I reflected the cues I use the most, I guess, and I roll my eyes a lot. And I was talking to Mark about it, and he's like, you roll your eyes when you're happy, when you're mad, when you're irritated. And I'm like, and I don't know how to.
Didn't you?
Yeah, I did. And I actually just did it right now on accident too. And I don't know how to break that habit, because I guess I'm just like really in the eye rolling. Even though a lot of, like, you're gonna take it as if I'm like, ugh, but I'm just taking it as like a, oh.
And that is not unusual. Okay. When we start talking about communication within relationships, which is next week, we'll talk about the fact that for successful relationships and ones that have very little conflict are ones where people understand each other's language.
Right.
Body language, love language, all those such sorts of things that we have. And after 40 years of marriage, my wife finally understood one of my body language signals. Because we'd be in a discussion and it would be very clear that I had forgotten to do something or I'd made a mistake, and I'd go. And for years she took that as I was irritated with her when I was irritated with myself. And when she finally understood that, as I said, after 40 years, when she finally understood that, then it was no longer a source of conflict. But I never even realized that that's how she was interpreting it. So again, these are things that we have to work on. As for eye rolling, yeah, people roll their eyes about all sorts of things.
Yeah.
You can say, oh, not that again. That sort of thing. Or there's, I wish she'd quit. Or there's lots of things. Or it can be, oh, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of those kinds of, and oculesics, which is what the eye motions is, and Elisa actually talked about oculesics in her post, really say a lot. Eyes are extremely expressive. You know, there's a lot to do with them. Pupils will dilate when we get excited about things. When we get into an adrenaline situation, it's the fight or flight response. And eyes are, you know, have often been called a window to the soul, right? In a lot of ways, it tells you a lot about the person, how they react. And in fact, there's a plant. You've all heard of the plant called belladonna.
Nope.
And there's a plant called belladonna. And belladonna is the source of a drug called atropine, which is what the ophthalmologist puts into your eyes to dilate your pupils. Well, the plant is called belladonna because the Romans used to extract that stuff and put it into women's eyes to dilate their pupils and make them more beautiful. Belladonna. That's why we call it that. Because of that, we see these big dark circles as beautiful. And of course, they can't see because of sunlight and everything else, but that wasn't the idea, right? But nonetheless, you know, eyes are extremely expressive. There's, you know, we have a range, and eyes and the structures surrounding it. I mean, you can do an awful lot with a simple raised eyebrow. You know, it's a very expressive motion, and it's something that we do almost without thinking because it's become habit. In your case, it's a habit.
Yeah.
And habits, man, habits are hard to bust. You really have to work at it. And sometimes you succeed, and sometimes you don't. But understanding, you know, if you roll your eyes about everything, then there have to be other clues as to what you're really feeling.
Right.
And so then we get into the rest of kinesics, which is facial expressions, body posture, all those other things, because you can express a lot. I would imagine that it takes a while with people who do a lot of eye rolling, and quite frankly, virtually everyone does. You are not alone in that, to be honest. Until you get to know the person, then those eye rolls can become anything. Comedians use an eye roll to great effect. But we know they're comedians. We know they're trying to make a joke. Actors, you see a good actor can say more by keeping their mouth shut and just changing the expression on their face and the way they hold their body than most of us can say in a full sentence. It's really critical. But yeah, so what did you learn from thinking about that?
I don't know. I guess I learned more about myself I guess I learned more about the cues that I give Mark as well. Like, what if I'm like really angry at him versus if I'm like excited for him or with him.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's.
Yeah. Know thyself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So good. Who's next?
Yeah.
Felicia.
So I kind of learned something about myself, like after reading this past week. So this weekend, I noticed what I do when I'm anxious, if I'm having an anxiety attack. I play with my keys a lot,
Uh-huh.
and I pull it apart. Just do that over and over again.
Oh.
And drove my boyfriend crazy
Yep.
this weekend. I was like, sorry. And I like put it down. And then like 5 minutes later, he could see me doing it again. So I can sense that he was getting irritated because of his huffing and puffing. But
His body language.
his body language is, would you stop? Like, but yeah, that's what I do. And then I kind of talked about it in my discussion too, that I'm really quiet when I'm in a bad mood.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not allowed to be quiet when I'm actually happy because people think I'm in a bad mood. So yeah.
Yeah. And we express our moods in different ways, our good moods and bad moods. Right? So, okay, thank you. Who's next?
Well, I used to be extremely shy as she is when I was her age. I've opened up a lot since then, but I still see myself when I'm in a group of people I don't know. Stand back and watch and keep my mouth shut. I like to think that I'm a little more open than I used to be, but sometimes I find myself reverting to my own old bad habits.
Mm-hmm. And again, depending on the situation, that may not be, that's not unusual at all. There will be situations where you walk into a room full of strangers and you're going to have to put on your party face. I'm thinking specifically when you take the other class I'm teaching this mod, which is professional development. We talk a lot about networking, and there you have to go in like glad hand Charlie. Shaking hands, talking to people, being friendly, open, be willing to talk about yourself, something that is difficult for some people to do and very easy for others, but it's difficult for some. And so there's a time, and there's other times you're going to walk into a place and you're not going to know anyone. I mean, I've been to lots of meetings, and inevitably professional meetings have receptions. And the first time you go to one of these things, you basically don't know anybody there. You might know one or two people, but basically you don't know anyone there. Well, guess what? Everybody else is in the same boat, pretty much. So it's not at all unusual to sort of walk in, look around and say, where do I go from here? And then you just have to, again, as I say, put on your party face and walk up and say, hi, I'm Hope, who are you? And then start the conversation. Now, a lot of times they'll have name tags. So we've got names, and you can say, hi, Bill, I'm Hope, where are you from? And it just goes from there. Sometimes we have to step out of our comfort zone in these situations. But yeah, being, there is nothing inherently wrong with being shy.
But it sometimes can hold you back from meeting with people.
It can. When you come to that realization, though, you start doing something about it. How do you, when you walk in and you're shy and you're not looking at anyone and you're sort of standing in the corner trying to be Lily Wallflower, you're not going to get very far. But if you actually make eye contact with people, start the body language. Hi, I'm here. I'm alive. I'm a human being. When you start the eye contact, a pleasant expression on your face, you don't have to be grinning like my wife's husband used to say, grinning like a mule eating briars through a barbed wire fence.
Wait, what?
Pardon? Like a mule eating briars through a barbed wire fence, which all teeth out, to protect the lips, right? You don't have to look like that, but you do have to look like someone else wants to get to, to meet. Not for any other purpose than just who are you? And these are not meat market kinds of things. They're meet and greet. So, so you have to practice. And one way to do that is, well, we're in class. This is a good place to start. You know, and you all know each other. So maybe you don't feel like you have to do that because you all know each other. But you know what? It's great practice. And here's one thing about habits. They're hard to break. But after you repeat something 30 times, it is a habit. So practice that sort of thing. It's one way of doing that. I think I posted in there in somebody's, in a response to somebody, the story about my mother-in-law, my 98-year-old mother-in-law, who was a legal secretary for somewhere between 30 and 40 years. The only reason she retired is because they kicked her out because she was 72 and they had a mandatory retirement age of 72. She'd have worked for another 10 years and probably done well. But she would go into the job and she would be cheerful and friendly and happy. And finally, some guy walked in and said, "Maureen, how can you do this? You're cheerful and friendly. I see you all the time and you always have a smile on your face. You're always happy." And she looked at him and said, "From 9 to 5, I'm perfect." Which, and you know, she wasn't necessarily perfect from 5 to 9. But during those 9 to 5 hours, she was there to do a job and to be a good face for the firm that she worked for. So it didn't matter if she left the house in a foul mood, which occasionally happened. You know, lots of reasons. By the time she got to the office, it was left on the street.
I need to learn how to do that.
I think we all need to. I mean, it's a very good skill. She's amazing. It's a very good skill. My father's that way. He could be as mean as a goat at home. But as soon as he got out of the house, he was Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky Charlie. Used to drive us crazy. But he never put on an unhappy persona around other people. Closest he came was after my mother died. He tried to drink himself to death until the bartender said, "Stop, you're going home. I'm not going to serve you anymore." And that's when he quit. So, you know, that was a long time ago. And it was really that one time when he was, you know, dealing with grief with chemicals, which is not a great idea.
No.
Alcohol is a chemical. So, you know, there's just lots of things. Okay, thank you, Hope. Who's next?
Yes, I'll go.
Okay, thank you.
What I learned like every time I've read one discussion, I had a little connection to them. So, because I'm shy, I have to know the person really good. With his, I kind of connection, like, I don't really communicate with my family, so I just avoid the situations going on.
I was just thrown into the bus.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's nothing wrong with being shy. Shy people, first off, you don't stick your foot in your mouth, right?
For real.
And you don't do that. And silence sometimes is really useful. In 1979, a movie came out by the name of Being There. And it was based on a novel by a Central European author by the name of Jerzy Kosinski. And it was about a man in Washington, D.C. who was a gardener. And he was self-educated. Everything he ever learned got off television. And for various reasons, he ended up on the street and ended up meeting a wealthy man through accident. His car hit him. The wealthy man's car hit him. And they got to know him. And because he was not used to talking, people would say something and he would just sort of look at them. They decided he was a genius. He ended up being an advisor to the President of the United States because he basically would sit and listen while people went on and thought and made decisions and then came to the conclusion that he was supporting them, therefore, since he was so smart, it must be the right decision. It was a bit of a satire, social satire, obviously, but it was really a lot about the power of not throwing your own ideas out as being the only important thing, the power of quiet. Because he would talk about gardening, because that's what he knew. It's all he ever did. And people would see it as analogies for improving the world and gave them good ideas. And that's all. I mean, he never said anything, virtually. It's quite an interesting movie. It should not be taken as something that says quiet people are always powerful. But in his case, it was an analogy to the contrast between people who don't shut up. Because there's a lot of quiet people, but in every crowd there's somebody who can't stand silence and will fill it with noise, one way or another. Okay? But thank you, Elisa. And really, the issue occasionally, what I suggested was to follow some of your thoughts, which were to smile, make eye contact. When that happens, people say, "Oh, there's an interesting looking person. I'll go talk to her for a minute." And then you find out that, you have some interesting things to say.
Don't face as a lot.
So if you don't like people that much, you don't want them talking to you.
Well, there are people like that too, but unfortunately in this world you can't get along without without being involved with other people in some way. And there are people that really just don't like people, and I have to wonder, what in their background has made them so afraid of people, because that's really what a lot of that is. When they don't like people. I'm not saying shy people are afraid of people. I'm saying that people who don't like other people, that comes out of some form of fear. Rejection, maybe the way they were treated when they were young by their parents. There's a lot of reasons that happens. Lots. But there's no reason. There's no reason that you would look at someone and reject them simply because they were quiet. Okay. Who's next?
I kind of forgot the question because of all these answers and stories being told. So.
Well, it was about your discussion.
Oh. Well, for me, it's kind of a mix of. So I kind of noticed that when I was really young, when I would get really, really bored, and that still happens today. Sometimes you'll see me just do this sort of hand motion. I do that whenever I get bored, or you'll just see me eat a bunch of popcorn. For me, I like to keep my hands in motion, because if I don't, then for some reason my brain just shuts down faster and I just fall asleep. So, but when I was younger, I used to have some of those like click pens, and for no reason whatsoever, whenever I got bored, I would just dismantle it and then put it back together and repeat it over and over until I got bored doing that. And nobody really notices that I do that, because usually I do it by myself or when other people are distracted by something else. Although people may think that I don't pay attention, but that's just how I do it to keep myself awake and to pay attention.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, if people are thinking that you're not paying attention, one way to counter that is to ask a question. Make it clear that you've heard every word. I worked with a man when I was first working in the pharmaceutical industry as a chemist. I was working in the chemistry department, and one of our group leaders was a man who was getting up toward retirement. Whenever we went to a seminar, the first time I attended one of our regular seminars at the company, we'd have visitors come in and talk on various topics. And Mort would sit there and he'd go to sleep in the middle of a lecture. And first time I saw this, I thought, listen, we just brought this guy from Germany. What do you know, what's going on here? Why are you asleep? And then at the end of the talk, he would wake up and ask a question that was some obscure point out of the middle of his lecture. So he wasn't asleep. That was how he listened. He shut out the distractions. And after that, I started paying attention, and he did that 100% of the time. And he would always ask a very penetrating and very relevant question. So different people have different styles of that. We'll talk about listening. That's this week's topic, is listening. So we'll get there. So, Michael, you have anything to say?
Just really like I learned about myself, like things I do too.
For some time now, but you haven't stopped to practice.
Sorry.
But like I make eye contact and then like shake my head when I'm like, really paying attention, and then like even if they're not like talking directly to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So you kind of do like a bobblehead motion.
Not really like that. Just like
Yeah.
like I'm like
Yeah.
Acknowledging.
Yeah, everyone has their own communication style. Remember, nonverbal is 93% of our communication. Now you might quibble and say, oh, it's only 90%, but big deal. It's still the vast majority of our communication, right? So the nonverbal is critical because the nonverbal actually conveys, in many ways, more information. It's more believable. Most of us find it more believable, which is why, Amber, eye rolling can indicate to people from their interpretation a mood that you may not be in.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like me, when my wife would say something that I had done that I knew darn good and well I shouldn't, and I'd sigh. Wasn't mad at her, but that's the interpretation. So we have a lot of strategies that we can use. And part of the purpose of this is how can we improve our body language? How can we pass that image that we want people to have? How can we make that clear rather than confusing? And it's really hard because, of course, facial expressions are probably the hardest for us to control because they're so instantaneous. All body language can be controlled. It's not unavoidable. It's not completely involuntary. And we can control it. But for the most part, we don't. Why? Because when we control our body language, we go silent. If you think that 90 to 93% of your conversation is through body language, if you don't have any body language, you're silent. So body language is critical. You do need it. You want people. What you want to do with, what's your other choice when you're hearing something from someone, Michael? Yeah. I've had people do that. Drives me nuts. Because it interrupts the flow of information. But that's their way of acknowledging that they're hearing what's being said. And sitting there nodding now and again, you probably don't want to do it all the time, but then you look like you have Parkinson's. But you really want to acknowledge, and making eye contact with a speaker is one of the best ways to acknowledge that you're part of the conversation. But their expression, when I can remember I was in a seminar that was supposed to be, it was a continuing education thing, and it was about about foods as a source of natural therapies and cures, natural treatments of disease. And this was an all-day seminar, and at one point in the middle of this seminar, this woman says, eating one egg is the equivalent of smoking 5 cigarettes a day. And I know what my expression was. It was absolute disbelief and anger because it was so patently, absurdly wrong. And some of the people sitting around me, I didn't say a word, but I sat up and just, and some of the people around me looked at me like, what's with you? They saw that my reaction was absolutely negative about that. And it was essentially involuntary on my part because I was so completely startled. I lost control of my body language and really reacted like, oh God, I have to leave this seminar. This is worthless. I stayed. I finished it out, but it made me, it was my reaction to a statement that just, where in the world do you get this? So we do have some control, and there are times when we let it go. And that's not all bad. Sometimes people need to see your reaction. And we use, as instructors, we will use body language a lot of times. When I'm teaching something like algebra or statistics, you can imagine that there's lots of times in those classes when people are not getting it. And I can see it on their faces. I can see it with their body language. And I'll home in on that. All of us here as instructors do that. We'll home in on that expression that says, I don't get that in the slightest. That doesn't make any sense. And then we'll start drilling down on it and attempting to, figure out where the disconnect was and then help the student learn. Okay, so that's one of the ways that we use body language here, and we use it, that we do it a lot. So, Chad, you didn't post, but do you have any comments? You didn't post yet.
Yeah, not particularly at this point. It's brain's been spinning on too many other things to really focus on that.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts or insights you got about your study of body language last week? Or I should say nonverbal communication, because there's lots of body language, of course, isn't the only nonverbal communication. Silence. Okay, well, I'll fill some of the silence with some noise, which is we're going to talk about listening. Okay. Communication is always a two-way street. Even if all you're doing is journaling, you're writing from yourself to yourself. Okay, but we're not going to talk about journaling here. We're going to talk about interpersonal communication, both professional, family, relationship, random stranger you meet on the bus, whatever. Listening is the other side of communication, because communication always has a provider of information and a recipient of that information. And listening is a process. Can anybody tell me the difference between hearing and listening?
Hearing is the physical act of hearing something. Listening is taking in what they're saying.
That's a good way to put it. Thank you. Yeah, hearing is a physical event. Vibrations in the air strike the eardrum vibrates at the frequency of that vibration that came in. That vibration sends a nerve signal to the brain, which is where you actually hear. The process of hearing, and listening rather, is to take that information. Listening is something that involves the mind and the heart, because you're interpreting. So what the physical act of listening is to receive information, to integrate it, evaluate it, and then take the next step. The next step could be store it away. It's what you do with students a lot of times. You learn things, you integrate it, you evaluate it, you learn about it, and you store it for further use later. Or take action. Taking action in a conversation means you may or may not respond to the person who's transmitting the information. Okay? And that is going to be dictated by the information. Now, there's lots of different ways that information, that listening is influenced. There are a lot of different influences on listening. There are also different styles. If you've started reading chapter 5 yet, you know that. If you've looked at the discussion for this week already, there's some information there. But the first part of chapter 5 talks about the various different aspects of listening. And one of those aspects is receiving, which means that you're taking the information in, which also means in order to take the information in, you have to be attending to the process. And by that, I mean not sitting there playing Angry Birds on your phone or whatever you play on your phone, or thinking about, what you're going to do on the weekend, what movie you're going to go see, or worrying about your kid in school, something parents have a habit of doing, or any other thing. Brooding about a fight that you had with the significant other in your life, whether that's a child or an adult. But really listening is paying attention to the information that's coming in. This is something that's a challenge for a lot of people. Because we all have different interests. We've got a variety of people here in class. How many of you came to college thinking, oh boy, I'm looking forward to a communications class? None of you, I would guess, really.
No, not really.
Right. And largely because this is the kind of school it is. Now, if you go up the road to CSU, where they have a communications department that offers its own degrees, some of those students might actually be anticipating something like this. But the problem is that I honestly believe that every college student should take a communication class, because communication is key to all of our professions in one way or another. Even if we're a solitary programmer, we're communicating in that medium with somebody, even if it's the person that we're developing the software for. We have to be communicating with someone. The communication skills are necessary. We used to have jokes, about, especially engineers. Oh, golly. They were not a protected class when I was a kid. So we could make all the jokes we wanted about how engineers couldn't communicate. But in reality, they have to communicate very, very succinctly. All of us do. So, and listening is an integral part of that. If you are in a class and you're learning something, and I'll go back to, say, my algebra class that I'm teaching and might be teaching next month, I think. But I'll go back to that class for a moment, because that's a class that there are a lot of people who have very negative reactions to the topic. I can't tell you how many people tell me I can't do math. And I just shut my mouth anymore, because I used to respond, oh, yes, you can. And I just shut my mouth now, because I know everybody can. It's that some people have convinced themselves they cannot. But you go into there and you're explaining a topic that is absolutely non-intuitive. I don't care what anyone says. Mathematics is not intuitive. Not for 99% of the human race. It's an artificial construct. It has rules. Once you know the rules, it's easy, in my opinion. Okay, I'll qualify that, because I happen to like math. It's easy. But in the process of going through the rules which govern the logic of mathematics, and mathematics has its own internal, very strict logic. Understanding those rules is what enables you to solve problems. Understanding those principles. And you know, when I'm up there talking, I have to give a lot of information that is not what people, again, are ready to receive or feel like they can. So I have to be very, very careful. Here's where it goes back to the nonverbal language. I have to watch my class very carefully. If you ever take algebra from me, and that might happen, you know, depending on when you take it and if I'm still here. But if you ever take algebra from me, you'll see that I watch you very carefully during class to make sure that you're understanding this, because when you miss part of it, you're really, really hurt. So we go over things. And this means that some people who come in and they love math and they've been doing math and everything and they like it and everything, they're bored. Well, I'm sorry if they're bored, because I have to teach everybody else too. But it's part of communication. And listening is what's important. Listening without that filter that says, I can't do this, that filter then becomes a micron-sized filter. In other words, nothing gets through. Blocks everything out. So listening is dependent on the filters we have. If we're listening to a talk by someone that we really enjoy, we're going to listen and hear. Example, when I was an undergraduate, I was a sophomore in college. So this would have been about 1966. I took a class in Latin American history from a dynamic teacher. And he gave a lecture one day on the invasion of Mexico by Cortez. And Cortez's trip into what is now Mexico City, Lake Tenochtitlan, and back out. And the stupidity of the Spaniards and the silly things they did. To this day, I can repeat that lecture verbatim, because it really fascinated me. I really listened and I integrated it. Okay? So we can learn. And part of it depends on the speaker, on the person that we're learning from. But in all cases, it's really receiving the information and then integrating it, evaluating it. Is this important? Is this something I need to know? You know, do I need to know what the weather next week is supposed to be? Well, no, because it's going to be whatever in the world it is. You know, this is Colorado. Wait 5 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got news for you. Anywhere in the world, it's wait 5 minutes. It changes that fast. And I've been places where I've been having sunlight on me, and I couldn't see Daniel because of the rain pouring down between the two of us. That's how variable that can be. Yeah.
I want a day like that.
No, it was pretty hard, because it eventually came to us. But, you know, but you listen and you learn and evaluate. And you evaluate when you hear something. Most things will stay in your short-term memory for about 3 seconds. Things that you're really interested in. Visual images as well. One of the reasons a lot of instructors use a lot of visual images, and one of the reasons that when I do things like teaching algebra, I do a lot of problems on the whiteboard, is because visual images will stay at least 10 minutes, long enough to start integrating into longer-term memory. And then about, some small percentage will stay for a pretty long period of time. So the art of learning is to figure out what small percentage is really important. Because I don't really care if you memorize in a math class a specific problem. What I want you to know is the methodology for solving it. A specific problem, you can always reproduce that if you have the methodology. It's sort of like the old story about give a man a fish, he's got a meal for a day. Teach a man to fish, and he's got a meal for life. Except in North Carolina, in which case you teach a man to fish, and he spends all day in a boat drinking beer. But in this case, if we are giving you the tools, and one of the tools is how do we integrate this stuff? This is why we like to have classes broken up. This is why we like to have a couple of days between classes, because in the time in between classes, our brains are integrating all this information that we've been hearing and seeing and picking up through the various aspects of active listening, which include the visual aspects of active listening, not just the auditory. Because visual images go to a different part of the brain. And if you can mix visual and auditory, you've got a more powerful learning tool. So when we are looking to integrate this information or evaluate it, what we're doing is picking through the important stuff to us and discarding the details. I don't care if the problem is 3 plus 5. The method of adding is what's important. And then responding. Responding is something that we normally do. One of the reasons that we ask, okay, can you tell me what you learned last week, or can you give me some feedback on last week? We want to know. We want a response. We want to know what stuck. And if not, if important things don't, then we want to be able to go back to them. But evaluating and responding are other important aspects of listening. There are many different listening styles, and they comprise a number of different purposes. I'm just going to read some of this because I didn't memorize it. There are lots of purposes to listening. One is to focus on messages that are being sent by the person giving you the information. To focus on those. People use a lot of words that are not important. What you're doing is picking out the important stuff. Okay. Understanding. We listen to understand. How many people do you know that you realize they didn't understand a word you said? Yeah. All of us have parents that are of kids that are beyond about 2nd grade. No. The answer to that is it's very hard for us to know that they've actually understood what they've been hearing or that they've even listened. Okay? But if we want to understand what the messages are, we need to be able to critically evaluate those messages. Now, how many messages do you think you get every single day that are absolutely worthless?
Tons, I'd have to say.
A few years ago, I read an estimate. We'll just talk about advertising messages. 3,000 a day.
Jeez.
On average. Many of them totally subliminal. You know, an advertisement for a business on the side of a bus that drives by. We see these things. Our brain sees them. Usually our brain sees them and then it immediately goes into the trash. Radios. Radio is nothing but commercial. Even National Public Radio. There's commercials there. for their sponsors, their donors, right? Television, pick up a newspaper. It's mostly advertising anymore. Go on the web. If you go into any service on the web, you're going to get ads thrown at you. That will depend on what Facebook and Google and other people have been able to track that you like. Part of it is to be able to monitor the nonverbal signals that are coming with all of that other stuff. If 93% of the communication is nonverbal, we're looking at it because we want to know what's being said, the thing that comes across. Politicians deliver very polished messages when they're making speeches, when they're thinking about it, because they have image consultants who help them understand what their body language is, how their facial expressions can be modified. We listen so that people will, and we send signals that we're actually paying attention. That's part of listening. If you're not paying attention, then the person that's talking to you is wasting his breath because nothing's getting in. In relations with people, whether they're professional relations or personal relations, we listen to show empathy when people are discussing issues that disturb them. Problems with their kids, disturbances, unhappinesses in their job or whatever. We listen to that. And we engage with people. We listen so we can engage intelligently in discussion and negotiation for mutual understanding. So a lot of things that go on, many things we don't actually think about. Okay, time for our 15-minute break. So let's go ahead and take that. And we'll continue in 15 minutes, Stephanie. So the purposes of listening we talked about. There are types of listening as well. And those types really depend on our intention from listening. There is, your book uses terms, I'll just go ahead and stay with them because there are other ways of looking at listening styles. But we're gonna stay pretty much with the book on this one. And what I want to try and do is just go through some material because really I'm focused on the discussion and the assignment for this week, which I want to really go through briefly before the end of class. But remember that listening is a process, and that process involves not just the physical act of getting information. And when I'm talking about listening here, mostly I'm talking about auditory because even though visual components make for a better way of getting information and retaining it. But I'm mostly talking about auditory listening because that's what you're going to run into in a lot of classes. But the idea of listening as a process is divided into sort of intent as well. Discriminatory or discriminative listening is listening and sort of in a group, which is not, we're in a group right now, but the only one of us talking is me. And I want you guys to know that you can speak up anytime you have something, a question or something you think you want to add to the discussion. So please do. I like my classes to be interactive as much as possible. Bless you. But discriminatory listening is sort of filtering out all the noise. If you're in a group of people, say at, I'll go back to the reception that I talked about that's part of any sort of professional meeting. There's a lot, usually these occur in a room, a good sized room, often with a lot of people. There's a lot of noise. And those noises are distractive. So discriminatory listening is when we blot out all but what we want to hear. Okay? Now, that can be taken to the point where, and we've seen it with our children, those of us who have children, that they blot out everything, including what we're saying that's important. But it's a skill that we have to develop because there are a lot of noises around us. And the noises around us contribute to the signals coming in. And we learn early on how to hear what we want to hear. Because you can, again, you can be in a like a store, and your kid wanders away, and if you listen discriminatively, you can hear them talking if they're talking, and find them because you recognize their voice. Or if you're listening to a friend in a large party, you blot out the other stuff that's going on so you can hear what your friend is saying. Okay? So that's an important part. It is a very basic form of listening because we are, in general, in a situation where there's background noise. Like we're talking, and I can hear Karen next door. And she probably hears me. And how many of you guys have you noticed that she's talking?
Only because you brought it to my attention.
Same.
I wasn't paying attention to her. I was about listening to you.
Discriminative listening. Discriminative listening is what you're doing. So, and we do it all the time. There is, and again, use their terms, informational listening. This is when we are listening with the goal of comprehension. We want information. Some of us are information junkies, and we perhaps spend too much time gathering information. None of these things are wrong, by the way. But that's one of the things that we do. One of the things that we do when I do a lot of listening to books on CD because I'm in the car a lot, driving back and forth to school, and the radio is a waste of time, in my opinion. And what do I read? Well, I read a lot of different things, but when I have got an interesting book, I most recently listened to a book called The Gene, which is about the human gene, the genome. And it's a very fascinating book. It's very long. It was like 15 CDs or something like that. Wow. But it was a tremendous amount of information. And I have a big background in that information area. I've studied it for years. And this guy was presenting all sorts of information that was recent information, more recent than the time I've been, since the last time I studied the subject in any detail. And so I listened very carefully, along with driving safely, of course. But part of me was listening and discriminatively pulling that and informationally pulling that information while paying attention to my surroundings so that I didn't drive off the road. But nonetheless, that was kind of informational. Critical listening is when you're actually trying to figure out what to do, some action to take. Okay? What's this mean? What am I going to have to do next? And then finally, there's empathetic listening, and empathy is the feeling of understanding the emotions of someone else. And that is just different from sympathy, which is a feeling of sympathy is related to your reaction to someone else's emotion in terms of wanting to not to understand those emotions so much as to support the person in their emotional responses. Empathetic listening is very hard to do. People who can do it generally end up being counselors. People who do it all the time and do it well end up being counselors, because that's really what they're doing. They end up being ministers, people who are working with others on their issues. So, and as I say, it's difficult to do, but it's hard to understand and experience someone else's feelings. It's a very difficult thing to do, especially strangers. Then your text talks about listening styles. And the reason I want to talk about listening styles is because that's really the subject of this week's discussion. Discussion 2, or discussion 3, rather. I have to go back on that. Come on. What is this? Discussion 3, let's just look at it briefly. Is about listening styles. So the instructions here, think about the different listening styles, and we'll talk about those in a moment. Which one best describes you and why? Which style do you have the most difficulty with or like the least, and why? And how would each of these different styles be useful in academic, professional, and personal situations? Okay. And if you are comfortable doing so, provide personal examples from your own experience. I don't want people to, this is not true confessions. Okay? So if you're uncomfortable with some of these things, then think about another way to deal with the issue. Okay? So I want you to think about it. Even if you don't want to write it down, think about some of these things, what the issues are. So we got people-oriented listeners. And those are the time when you're concerned with the needs, the feelings, the desires of others, and make it so focused on that you forget the rest of the message being delivered. So there's downsides to every style too. Okay, but in this case, you may be so focused on the other person's feelings that you don't get the rest of the message, or you miss part of it. Action-oriented listeners. Okay, these are people that really want precise, organized conversations. They want the information to be very well packaged and presented with not a lot of distractions or sidetracks. These people tend to become frustrated if they perceive that things are rambling. They tend to be frustrated if they think the speaker is totally disorganized or getting repetitive. And often it shows, you can see it in their body language if you're looking. Again, that whole body language gives you away a lot. And so if you're paying attention as a speaker, you can pick up on those things. Content-oriented listeners are those that are really looking for information. Lots of information. More information. They're information junkies. They want it in depth. And sometimes that means that they spend more time getting information than they actually have to do something with it. Because most of the time when we're getting information, you know, if you're in a learning mode, like in this class, you need information to deal with the assignments. Well, if you spend all your time getting information and don't do the assignments, because you get buried in the information, then that's a distraction. It's one of the things that those of us that are definitely content-oriented, which I am, can find ourselves distracted. One of the reasons I hate to turn on the computer sometimes is because I can go wandering around pathways on the web for hours, looking for information on some topic, digging through it, getting more, because you never have enough. Time-oriented listeners are managers, actually, in many cases. These are people that are goal-oriented, task-oriented. They've got jobs to do. They've got places to go, people to meet, things to see, and they have a timeline. And if you waste their time with what they consider to be irrelevancies, then they get really unhappy. They may stop you. They may cut you off before you give them all the information you think they need. So when you're dealing with time-oriented people and giving information, especially, I'm going to pick on the medical people a little bit. I'm going to give you an personal example of this, but especially in dealing with doctors. Doctors are not there to chit-chat. When you're talking about a patient, they want to know the facts. They want to know the information, and they don't want anything else. If they want anything like, you know, some information that you haven't given them, they'll ask it and they'll expect a concise answer. Example, many years ago, our younger daughter, well, she was 9 months old, she fell, hit her head, and had a closed head injury. Well, not a closed head injury in that her fontanelle hadn't closed. And so we find this out a long time later because her head gets very, very large. And through various means, you know, at that point we knew we needed to talk to a pediatric neurosurgeon when we found out she'd had a head injury and that there was fluid building up in her head. To make a long story short, we had to manipulate the system to get to the pediatric neurosurgeon that all of our medical friends said was the only person in Central North Carolina to see. And so I took her to the first appointment. My wife couldn't make it. So I got to take our daughter to the first appointment, and I walk in, and in walks this physician, and he gives me kind of a limp handshake. And he says, "Tell me about the child." No chit chat, no hi, how are you? Tell me about the child. I had him nailed right from there. He wants the facts, nothing but the facts. And I gave him, in 2 minutes, the entire history. After that, as far as he was concerned, I was golden. I didn't waste his time. Now, he also happened to be one of these guys that thought all mothers were hysterics. And so it was a good thing I took the baby first, because the next time we both went, and he only wanted to hear from me. So it was a matter of style. And he was very impatient with anything that took longer than a couple of minutes. So he was someone who was time constrained, and he very, very, very good pediatric neurosurgeon. Personality was adults of a dish rag. But with the kids, he came alive. That's all we cared about, really. That's all we cared about. So what we want to do is we look at these different styles. There's descriptions on here of various listening styles on pages 338, 339, 340 in your textbook. And what you want to do for the discussion is to look at these decide what kind of a listener, what's your predominant listening style. Well, I'll tell you right now, everybody listens in different styles in different situations. And there are also, interestingly enough, gender differences in listening style. I don't want to make too much of that, but there are. And of course, there's nothing universal, but there are some general things that have been seen. But with all of these different styles, for instance, I'm a content-oriented listener mostly. I want information. And the more information I have, the more I feel I have a handle on whatever the issue is. I understand it. Sometimes that information might be something no one else on God's green earth cares about. And I'm perfectly happy with that. I mean, that's just the way it is. In my family, we have a wide variety of interests. I'm a chemist, a mathematician, and a physicist. My wife is a sociologist and a physical therapist. My older daughter majored in theater and is a director, as well as a very, very good technical theater person, meaning lights, sound, and set building. My younger daughter is an Egyptologist.
A what?
An Egyptologist.
Can
She
you,
has her degree in the study of ancient Egypt. She translates hieroglyphics and the other two Egyptian languages known as hieratic and demotic. Her thesis for her master's degree was to translate a papyrus that was 4,000 years old and was a contract written in hieroglyphics. So that's what she does. What she does now, she's now a novelist. She writes young adult fantasy fiction. So, we've got a lot of variety in the family. As I said, I just finished listening to this book, The Gene. Very, very well written, excellent book, lots and lots of information. I was just like, I was in heaven listening to this thing. My wife is going to try to listen, and she may or may not succeed because she doesn't have that same passion for the subject. So we have different things that really interest us. And so when my wife sometimes really gets tired of me getting more information and more information and more information on a topic, and she wants me to, can we do something? And quite frankly, I do the same thing when she's off on one of her tears, because we all have them. And I keep thinking, why don't you do something useful? Which, of course, is not a very nice thing to say. But nonetheless, it's real. So that's what I am. My secondary style, actually, though, is more people-oriented. This is rather typical of someone in education, by the way. These content and action or people-oriented styles. Because people-oriented style is actually paying attention to what people are saying, their feelings, their frustrations, their paying attention to when they're not getting a topic and when they need more help. So that's my secondary. Although at times I am also action-oriented, and that I think I listen, to help myself and maybe others to determine what to do next. And we all do that to some extent. I mean, you're thinking in terms of action-oriented when you're talking about something like, well, what color are we going to paint the bedroom? You're going to think about it. You're not going to, unless you're a teenager, you're not going to pick, a paisley wall. We have And if you don't really explain to somebody what you want, you're gonna be lucky to get what you have. When we moved into our house, my wife wanted a wall that was, the usual builder beige color, painted with something a little, something a bit of a mural type of thing, because she was going to use it for an office for treating her clients. And what we got was the landscape from Tatooine, from Star Wars. And it's really strange. It's well done, but it's really not what we had in mind. So you also, but we wanted something done, and the person that did it didn't consult with us very well. But action-oriented listening is really what everyone involved in the decision on something that needs to be done need to be listening from. So there are times when these are necessary. Time-oriented is also necessary. Sometimes you have time constraints. Okay, what do we need to do? Okay, a few years ago, 5 years ago when our daughter got married in Copenhagen, we were going over for the wedding. So we had a deadline and we had a lot of stuff to do. And so all of our conversations, all of our discussions, and all of our listening to each other was based on, we have a time constraint. We have to be on an airplane at this time on this date. So we have this much to do. How are we going to do it? That's time-oriented thinking. It's also, to some extent, action-oriented. So we have all of these different kinds of listening styles, and there are plenty of examples, I think, in all of our lives, if we think about them, of all of these styles. So let's start there. Anyone want to talk about a time when they were involved in a discussion and their mode of listening was, say, let's just say time-oriented. We'll go in reverse order. When you had a time constraint and you had to be working with people and listening to people and how to do something. Want to talk about that?
Okay, so I used to be a waitress at Red Lobster, and people would come in on their lunch breaks, so I had to make sure that they got, I don't know, I had to talk to them about how to get what they wanted out as fast as possible, but then I also had to talk with the kitchen and everybody else.
Right. So that was all time oriented because they were on a lunch break and they had a limited amount of time. Right.
Yeah. Every so often we have migrations to different systems at work. And once those happens, everything has to be in place beforehand. We have to know where we're going to be going from there afterwards.
And there's usually a deadline, right?
And always a deadline.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mine deals with work too. I have to get 15 people up and to breakfast by 7:30 and I get there at 6. But you're still it happens.
Yeah.
But you still have to talk to them and treat them as a person and not just a job. So I still have to talk to them and carry on the conversation while I'm trying to do my job, but trying to get it done as fast as possible. Then we have people that want to talk forever and a day. I'm okay. I'm trying to inch out the door as I'm still trying to listen to them, but it's hard. You just want to sit there all day and talk to them because they don't have that one-on-one.
They're lonely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of them don't have family members at all that come visit.
So then they need somebody who's capable of giving them an empathic listening experience.
Yeah. So when I get a couple extra minutes, which is rare with my job, but I try, and I go out and talk to them if I can.
Great. Great. Others?
Mine's also kind of job related, because I used to work as a cashier for a Del Taco back when my family lived in Lakewood. So I would have to like on a daily basis when I was working, I'd have to ask them what their order was, type it all in, read it back to them, seeing if I got everything right, and then I had to also try to remember that. And especially when it came to a rush hour and all the millions of deals that we had, it was just lots of information that I wanted to try to get like the most important pieces, and then that way I can get them moving along and, you know, do my job well.
Okay. So there, time was important because it's supposed to be a fast food place.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when I also had to work the drive-through. It was really hard because the headset was really, really crackly, so I could get tidbits of information here and there.
Yeah. That's no fun. They needed to fix that. But okay. Anyone else have anything on that topic? If not, we'll back up to content-oriented listening. No experience with listening for content? What do you do in your classes?
We're listening to get information.
Pardon?
We're listening to get information.
Right, content oriented. Isn't that what that is?
Yep.
Okay. And it's a communication process. It's supposed to be back and forth. That's why I keep saying ask questions, please, make comments. I'm open to that. What about action oriented?
It's like, what do you feel like having for dinner tonight? That everybody's been a part of it to some extent.
Mm-hmm. It's listening to accomplish a task. Right. Or it could be, anything else. When are we going to go to, go to see the latest popular movie that we want to see? There's no time constraint there, except how long is it going to be in the theater? But there is an action as when, and how's it going to fit into your schedule? Okay, what about people-oriented? Now, there's got to be some people-oriented stuff here.
I feel like I'm well with this one because my mom always tells me that I have like a big heart and that I'm really emotional, and this is pretty true because when my mom goes through hard times and it's sad and all that, I can read her like an open book or so, and I can tell when she's sad, and I want her to tell me what's making her sad or frustrated or all that, because I want to understand like why she feels this way and if there's any way I can help.
So that's also an example of empathetic listening, which is another another aspect of this. Excuse me. See if I can lubricate my throat a little bit. Maybe I'm getting a message from my throat to shut up.
Let the students do the talking a little bit more.
Yeah, let's do that. So people oriented. That's people oriented with an empathetic slant to it, which is that's a big part of relationship conversations. So, what about others? There's bound to be a more people-oriented experience here.
Right now, I'm experiencing communication with my eldest son. He treats me like he's my parent, and I've about had enough of it.
How old is he?
He'll be 29 tomorrow.
Yeah.
How does he treat you like like he's a parent?
Currently I live with all 4 of my children. He wants to move out and live with his girlfriend, which I'm so okay with. My second eldest wants to go live with him. My second eldest is disabled and cannot live on his own. I don't see my older son being sympathetic when he has a seizure or his blood sugars drop. He has no clue what to do or how to deal with it. So I'm trying to tell my son, is that such a good idea? Is that really what you want to do? I can't stop him. So they want to move out right now. They literally gave me a week's notice. I have no way of making that happen for you. So he wants me to come home tonight and talk to him about it, but he expected me to be there right now. He was at work all day. I had the day off. I had to be here when he got off of work. He expected me to be there. So now he's blowing up my phone, yelling at me, saying that I lied to him and all this. I told you I'd be there. I'll be there. And it's not the first time he's talked to me like this. He told me I lied to him, and I don't know. He just treats me like he's my adult. I have 22 years on you, son. You are not my mother. You won't talk to me like that. I've had enough. And this is at least once a week occurrence with him.
Seems like he just needs to get put in this place.
It doesn't do any good because then I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disrespect you. I didn't mean to be rude to you until the next time. So at this point, go live with your girlfriend and let her put up with your crap because I'm done.
Yeah. He'll learn on his own. I mean, you said he's 29.
He'll be 29 tomorrow.
Yeah, it'd be good for him.
Mhm.
Well, I'm more concerned about my 26-year-old living with him.
Well, you want me to ask what's wrong with him?
He was born with chronic pancreatitis, and about 4 years ago, they took out his pancreas 100%. Since then, now he's obviously a type 1 diabetic. Since then, he's had seizures and kidney stones and bleeding ulcers, and he's got a backpack full of medications that he takes on a daily basis. My youngest son, he's 19. He totally understands what Brandon's going through because he's been there from day one where Sean has not. So my oldest son has no sympathy when it comes to my other son and has no understanding. And I don't think he wants to take the time to understand. So as a mother, to see him go live with somebody that doesn't understand, doesn't have empathy, it's hard to let it happen. I tried to talk to him and say, well, why don't you and your younger brother live together? But Adam's nowhere ready to live on his own yet. So I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah, that's hard.
And I understand that Brandon doesn't want to live with me for the rest of his life. He's 26 years old. He wants a life of his own, and I totally get that. But he cannot live on his own because if he has a seizure, who's going to be there to help him? If his sugars bottom out, who's going to be there to help him?
Yeah.
So I don't know what to do with all this, but I'm not done with my son's attitude. So this is what I'm dealing with.
My wife just took a class on communicating with troubled children, which is what your 29-year-old sounds like to me in this discussion.
I know my son has ADD, and my youngest son has it too, and I know ADD and depression go hand in hand. My youngest son, I've gotten him therapy, I've gotten him the medication he needs, I've gotten him the help. My older son refuses the help, so what do I do? So then he acts like he's my mother, and I'm just, it's not gonna fly with me. I'm tired of being talked to like that.
Well, one of the things that I'm talking about a class in dealing with basically the adoption situation where you get a child who's had a really lousy first few experiences. But the methodology can be used, And in fact, in our house, we're trying to implement this because there's communication problems in any family. I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect family. Some hide it better than others, but it happens. One of the strategies is when someone starts doing that, you don't get mad. You don't yell. Oh, wait. You look at them and very calmly say, can you say that again a little more politely?
Well, this is all.
And
coming
that
through
that
text
sometimes
messages,
takes,
So there's part of the problem.
yeah, but that sometimes takes lots of repetition. But eventually people get the message. And if no other strategy works, what have you got to use? What have you got to lose by trying it?
I don't yell at him or call him names or belittle him. I just simply say, son, we need to communicate a little better.
But he's not getting that
message.
message. So one of the methods is to help him understand what communicating better is, which might be, can you say that a little nicer? Because here's what happens a lot of times. They'll say the same thing in the same tone of voice and then say, please. So you say, well, that's an improvement. Now let's work on tone of voice. And sometimes it takes a lot of work. The examples being shown, and that's one of the simpler ones, but the examples being shown were examples that took a long time to get to that stage.
I've got to go babysitter homes.
Ah, okay. All right. Get to work on, look at the assignment, get to work on that, and we'll see you on Wednesday. But it's all part of effective communication. And when it sounds like he has some other issues, which is why I think something like that might be a help in that kind of communication.
Well, he's told me that his girlfriend's gonna go ahead and sign her lease, and that I don't bother to come home, but I'm gonna come home all right. He's not gonna like what I have to say, but I am coming home and we are gonna discuss this. Because I'm really tired of him talking to me the way he does.
It is difficult. And I don't know your son, obviously. So I don't know what's going through his head, but it can't be easy for him either.
No, and I understand that. I think he thought I was gonna be there at a certain time, but that wasn't communicated between the two of us. I told him I'd be there on Monday. I'm gonna be there on Monday. He works, I work. He doesn't get home until after I'm at school. So what am I supposed to do, son?
Yeah. Again, to expect people to remember your schedule
Exactly.
is,
He's jumping to the conclusion that I lied to him and told him I was gonna be there and I wasn't. So he's angry with me because he feels like I lied to him, but I said, I'm at school, what do you want me to do?
yeah, and you can't just leave
No,
because school is the other career you have right now.
exactly.
Those kinds of communication issues, it seems like many times the method I'm suggesting would be a shock to him because it's not what he's used to, which is why it might actually get through to him. Good vampire sneeze, I like it. But it's why it might actually have a chance of getting through, because unexpected. What you're going to do is surprise him when you do that. His first reaction might be to get mad the
I'm
first time.
certainly not gonna go there and start yelling at him.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try talking to him at first. But I mean, I'm gonna simply tell him, I'm your mother, not your child. And I'm real tired of you talking to me like that.
Yeah, it's not, well, I can guarantee you that that kind of communication is in every family.
None of my
And it
other
works.
kids talk to me like that.
No. It works. It goes back and forth. He's trying to break free.
Bye.
Yeah, I know, but he doesn't want to. He's nice and secure where you are, with you there. because you are part of his support system.
Right.
He's not, I think, this is my personal opinion and from having seen it in my own extended family. He's not, he both wants to break free and he's not comfortable
Before
with
we
it.
moved here, we were living in Iowa. Before we moved here, he was living on his own. He's been on his own since he was 16,
Yeah.
per his choice.
Yeah.
And he had a roommate, and his roommate moved to Wyoming, and I had been trying to get back to Colorado, so he offered to let us come live with him, so it was a win-win. I helped him with his rent, and I got back to Colorado.
Ah,
So it's not a matter of us not wanting to live together, 'cause
Uh-huh.
for the most part, we get along pretty well. It's, he wanted me there now, and he thought I wasn't honoring his wishes, and simply the communication wasn't there. And then he said I lied to him, and I'm like, wait a minute,
he should know that you go to school.
he does know.
But he is choosing to sort of throw that out.
Well, I told him, I said, you're jumping to conclusions without even discussing it with me. You made an assumption and you ran with it, and now you're calling me names and you're saying that I lied to you. I said, you need to take a step back and look at the whole picture before you start getting rude with me. And like I said, this is all through text message, so it's not like he could hear the tone of my voice or I can hear the tone of his voice. And then my other son texted me, Sean's really mad at you. And I said, yeah, I know. What can I say? I'm at school. I can't do anything about it right now.
No, and it doesn't sound like it's to me, it doesn't sound like it's something that needs to be dealt with right this instant, that it can't
Oh,
wait
but he
until
thinks
9
it
o'clock
does.
tonight.
He thinks it does.
Yeah, well.
It's all about him.
Yeah.
He probably thinks that he probably
You're
wants
avoiding
you, and I always can say this. He wants you to make him his first
Priority.
instead of school.
Oh, that's too bad. That's not life.
Because I'm kind of, since I'm still a teenager, probably like almost 10, the situation. It's mostly me because I live with my brother. I'm kind of in the same position. My friend, I want to move out, but I can't. My mom won't let me. But
I
then,
don't have a problem with him.
yeah, but like
You've
your other
got to
son.
give me a little more
Yeah.
time. You can't tell me in a week that I'm gonna move out and then expect me to figure it out. I can't do it. You gotta give me a little bit of time here. As far as I'm concerned, go live with her. If she wants to put up with your crap, have at it. Because I'm done.
Well, I mean, finding a way to deal these kinds of familial relationship-based issues that we have with communication are hard. They're the hardest, actually, in terms of communication issues, because of the basic relationship and the communication. And, it's not the same. I don't think I ever, actually at this point, we are dealing with two elderly parents who have to be treated like children.
Mhm.
Because they
That's totally
alternate.
different, because I
Yeah.
sat with an elderly gentleman. He's 90, he'll be 97 in July.
Mhm.
And yes, I have to repeat myself over and over and over again. What day is it? What time is it?
Well, not only that, but when they're that age, there are times when they're 97 and there are times when they're 2.
Exactly.
So, and we're dealing with that with my mother-in-law, who's 98,
One of
and
the,
with my father at 101.
oh wow, 101. One of the caregivers had to fight with this gentleman to get in the bathroom to use the toilet. That's a no-brainer. But they were verbally fighting. He was cursing at him, and I know when I have to use the restroom, and they got into a big brawl over him going to the bathroom. So I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what
I deal with it every day.
I agree very well. she just turned like 81, and she like with her medicine, she won't take it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that something going into the field of medicine, you're going to run into a lot of that.
mhm.
You know, and I might say that there are times when my mother-in-law is 2, but she's 98 more than she's 2.
Yeah.
She can do her own meds. She can take care. She doesn't have problems going to the bathroom, except that she always needs to go right at the instant we need to go out the door. You know, but you know, that's the way kids are too.
Right.
You know, so but communication across familial gaps like that is difficult because you have that history. One way or another, you see him as your son and know that he should not treat you like he's the adult and you're the child. You're not there yet. In another 50 years, if you last that long, you might well be there.
I sure hope he's not taking care of me at that point.
But you never can tell. You never can tell. But still, what you are dealing with is someone who sounds to me, has some very ambiguous feelings about the whole thing. But also, if indeed he is ADD and possibly depressive, maybe
Very.
you know, maybe a bit of bipolar thrown in for fun.
I don't know about that.
You know, you're gonna. It's hard to communicate sometimes when those issues are interfering, which is why I suggested sort of the shock idea of just totally coming at it from a totally different.
Well,
Lay it on his plate.
I'm certainly not going to approach him with an attitude.
Yeah.
That gets me nowhere.
Yeah. So sometimes saying, you know, I really want to talk to you, but you have to talk to me in a decent tone of voice. You have to be polite, or there's nothing to talk about.
Well, he gets it in his head that it's this way.
Yeah.
And there's no diverting over that. I mean, this is the way it is, and that's all there is to it. But you're not, son, I didn't tell you I'd be there at this particular time. I told you I'd be there on Monday. You know I have school. You know I have work. What would you like me to do? I get off of work at 5, I'm at school at 6. When do I have time to come and talk to you in between that?
Mhm. Well, there is an issue there with you know, with his attitude that you have to be there when he wants you, but that's his issue.
That's his issue,
Um,
exactly.
And he may or may not be able to hear that at this point. But if he moves out and takes his brother with him,
That's my biggest concern, is that he's taken Brandon with him.
if he's not prepared to deal with it, that's a
A big deal.
potentially major issue.
And I've tried talking to Brandon and say, are you sure you want to live with him? He has no sympathies, no understanding of your medical situation. You're kind of jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire here.
It might be good for him though.
And maybe he'll live with him for a little while
Yeah,
and decide
exactly.
that this isn't for me.
And that's what, you know, maybe that's what will help you, because if it's stressing you out so bad, and because he knows that he'll always have a place to go back to.
Well, my kids always know that.
Yeah, exactly. So they always know that. So maybe, you know, just go there, you know, be calm, don't fight. Just
Oh,
tell him,
I
you know,
don't
like,
plan on
yeah,
going in
but
there with an attitude at
just
all.
tell him, like, if you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it. I can't stop you. I would advise you not to, but you're gonna do what you
Well,
wanna
I've
do.
already
and-
talked to him
yeah,
about
so-
this, and so, yeah, I've advised him very strongly not to do it. And I understand he's 26, he
Yeah,
doesn't want to live
exactly,
with
that's
mom
what-
forever.
Yeah, and so, you know, if he can't handle it, or if he doesn't, you know, like I said, he always knows that he has a place to go back to.
Right. I guess he's gonna have to learn from his own mistakes.
And that's
Well,
all
you
can
just
do.
hope the mistakes don't.
Yeah, I'm
Have a
hoping it
real
doesn't end him up in
downside.
the hospital again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
On the other hand, you know, you never can tell. Your older son may actually rise to the
I don't
occasion.
know.
Well,
Yeah, exactly.
You don't know.
Yeah, he might come back and.
He may,
And you might
he may
just
be back in
do
the week with
like-
his brother in tow and say, "Here, Mom."
Well, you might even just do it because you're saying that he won't do it. So we kind of, you know.
I've been there. I used to do that to my
Exactly, you
parents
know,
all the
they would-
time.
you
So
know,
you
you
won't,
can't
and I'm
do
like,
this,
really?
and
I
like-
won't?
So yeah.
Oh, I'm not telling Brandon you can't do it, and I'm not telling Brandon this is gonna be the worst thing that ever happened to you. I said, if that's what you want.
No,
I'm
I'm
telling
saying
you
about
my opinion on it.
I'm saying about your older son because you said how he doesn't have the sympathy and that kind of stuff. Like maybe because you're saying this stuff, it's gonna make him think like, well, I'm gonna show her wrong, and you know, it might be a good thing for both of them, for everybody. So
I'm not saying anything to Sean about his in non-sympathy for Brandon. I'm not saying anything to Sean about taking care of Brandon.
mhm.
I haven't said anything to Sean about it, because it's.
Well, maybe when you guys talk tonight, just remind him, you know, he does have to
It is
take these
important,
medicines.
yeah,
He does
How
have to do
important
this.
it
Yeah.
is.
And you know, but you know, be like, yeah, if he's gonna go with you, but you just have to remember
You
this
have to
and
make
this and
sure.
this. Like,
All
If
right.
this happens or this happens.
For his
you have
safety.
to.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. That's
All right. I think, I really hope that this does not blow up in your face, Hope.
I hope not
Um,
too. I mean,
but,
I'm not going in with an attitude. I am
yeah.
going there to try to talk to him. If he throws me that I'm the parent attitude again, I'm gonna lose it, because I have listened to this for the past month and I'm done with it.
Well, that's when I suggest you think about the alternative of, if let's try this again and you treat me like a human being,
Right.
not like a parent,
Or like.
or not like I'm your child.
Yeah.
Just see if that helps. I mean, if nothing else, it's going to shock him because it's not something he's used to.
What he's gonna do is he's gonna apologize and then he'll just do it again next week.
Then you remind him again.
Just
You have to be very persistent with people like that. Very persistent. And you have to take the high ground on it.
I've been trying to. I
Yeah.
haven't said we said anything to him. I have told him, I said, I don't like your attitude.
Well, then ask him to change it. I don't like your attitude is not the same as saying, let's try this again.
Yeah.
It's a really different, subtle, again, it's the words you use. You're saying the same thing, but it's the words you use. Remember I said that part of nonverbal is the choice of words. So the nonverbal there is, I love you, son, but you need to try again.
You bring it in a bit.
Yeah. Stephanie, you haven't had a chance to say much. Do you have anything to say?
No, not at this time. I don't.
Okay. Let's go look at this week's assignment, because I would like to talk about that, because we've got about 15 minutes left.
Sorry, not really the conversation.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We're also here to work and to talk about this whole issue of communication, because that's part of the problem, is a communication issue. And remember, I said the first night, the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's been achieved. You need to think about all of it. Just because we think we've said something clearly doesn't mean the other person heard it. Their filters, their experience, their desires, their angers, everything gets in the way of communication. It's a very delicate topic in a lot of places and on a lot of subjects. And when we're talking about the added issue of the health of your next son, that puts an emotional layer on you.
Yeah.
That is very, very difficult. And I can understand that completely. We don't have that particular problem, but for the 2.5 years that we were dealing with my daughter's head injury, you talk about stress in the family.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
It was something else. I'm sure glad that it turned out well. And
Well, luckily, he's been doing better. I mean, for a year after his surgery, he pretty much lived in the hospital.
I bet he did if they took his pancreas.
100%.
Yeah, you can lose about 2/3 of your pancreas and maintain full function, but if they took the whole thing,
It's all gone. He actually is better off now that he doesn't have it.
Well, I would guess pancreatitis is one nasty disease. So, and pancreatitis, inflammation of that nature, sometimes converts to cancer. And pancreatic cancer is 90 to 95% fatal.
Well, how come they couldn't just take it out?
They do what they call a Whipple procedure, which is the same thing. They take out your pancreas.
Yeah, but usually by the time we know that there's cancer there, it's already metastasized elsewhere. It's a very fast growing and a very quick cancer to metastasize. So, you know, it's sort of like liver cancer. Once somebody diagnoses you with liver cancer, it's almost never a primary. So you've already got metastatic disease, which is why liver cancer is almost always fatal, because it's already elsewhere.
What about ovarian?
Pardon?
Like ovarian is that?
Ovarian usually can be, ovarian is usually a primary. If they catch it early, it is, you know, treatable surgically. Sometimes they can treat it chemically to where you're not sterile in the process. It depends on if one side or both sides are involved.
Okay.
Okay. So the assignment for this week is to look at the listening process. We talked about some of the aspects: receiving, interpreting, recalling, evaluating, and responding. So you're to select one stage and write a paper. This is a communications class, so you write a lot of papers, obviously. And you guys are doing well at getting that done. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Researching ways you or others might improve performance in that area, which is one of those 5. We all have these. You know, some of us have difficulty receiving, and that may be dependent on who we're receiving it from. Okay. Interpreting, recalling, recollection. We're going to play an interesting game on Wednesday. That will go to that. Evaluating again goes through your own filters. When you evaluate information, you're filtering it through all of the other things that it impinges on, including your personal belief system and your personality. And responding. Responding is, communication, as I say, is two-way. And it's not just 1-2. It's 1-2, 1-2, 1. It goes back and forth. So there's passing information, there's receiving information, processing it, responding it, and then the original person giving information now is the receiver. So it's an iterative process. It is cyclic. Now, under all circumstances, no. Working in a doctor's office, you'll go in, you'll communicate with the doctor. The doctor will say, I want this test, this test, this test. And he wants the results. That's the end of the conversation. So that's a business conversation. Business conversations usually have a beginning and an end. Personal conversations cycle back and forth. And in some cases, for years. You know, my wife and I, her misinterpreting my sigh for 40 years, that's a cycle. Finally, we seem to have broken it, thank God. It's made things a lot easier. Okay, so we want to do that, and use some examples. If you have personal examples, that's fine. If you've had examples that you've witnessed that do not involve you, that's fine, because we've probably seen these things. Okay, we've probably seen many of these things. So again, you're going to write an APA paper, and you're going to at least have one citation in there. The more the better. I'd like you to do some research. So even though this thing says 1 page, that's at least 1 page. If you have to make it 1 page by making it single-spaced instead of double, don't worry about it. Just make it 2 pages. Okay? Don't worry about it. The 1-page issue is so that you're not churning out a thesis or thinking you have to. If any of you end up in the the healthcare administration program, the bachelor's program. You'll probably end up taking HCA 474, the senior thesis. In that class, I have you write your project is a 12-page paper. But that's easier than you think.
Does that include the abstract?
No, no such luck, Amber. Nice try. Or the cover page or the reference page. So what I don't want you to do is turn it into a major project. If you really get interested in it, let's talk. Okay, let's talk. So, any other questions? Any questions about that? You'll see here, I don't know if the last one actually I had not modified, but did it actually say that you had to use the Writing Center? No, good. Because some of these I've had to modify because they require it. Now that's because this came out of the online class where that's the only help you've got. I suggest you use the Writing Center. Ulisa used it very well this last week.
So you submit your paper in it, and then they give it back to you.
They send it back with comments.
So, I sent mine in from the first week, and
Mhm.
I still don't have it.
When did you send it in?
It was that Monday.
You sent it in? Then you should have followed up on it with 2 days later.
Right.
They should have gotten back to you sooner than that.
Yeah.
So either it got lost in the system somehow, or somebody dropped the ball. Because it should have come back to you.
Okay.
It should have. If you submit it on Thursday, you might not have it back before the weekend.
Right.
But if you submit it early in the week, you should have it back 24 to 48 hours. I don't know, how long did it take to get yours back, you said?
It took hours, just that day.
That day. See, that's the way it's supposed to work. So if it doesn't come back fairly quickly, prompt them. Ask, I sent you a paper. Can I get some feedback, please? My instructor wants it. So.
I'll like to think that.
But I suggest you use it because they'll, as I've said, while, if you have a typo or a one or two grammatical errors, you won't see much response from me on that. But they'll catch the things that are just simple little errors that we all make. Comma errors. There's a Facebook post that I found and showed to my professional development class this morning. It was about why you should be careful about what you write on social media. And the Facebook post read, "Don't wear black people."
What?
Don't wear black people. And then there was a comment, and then the next person said, "What?" And the last person said, "This is where we have this thing called a comma in the English language." So it was about coming to graduation, and it was supposed to be, "Don't wear black, comma, people."
God, that makes more sense.
Yeah, but don't wear black people. So they'll catch little things that don't make sense like that, or that you read it and you say, "Did they really mean that?" So, but they should get back to you faster than that. The Writing Center is really a nice service, and they have a bunch of people working for it. So do your best. Righty? See you on Wednesday.
All right.
If you have issues, just let me know. I can be reached by email as opposed to this last weekend. I will be checking my email all week. So I will get back to you if you have questions, issues, whatever. Okay? Oh, you've all noticed that they sort of modified the doors. The security doors are now online. So coming in, you use the single door on the north side of the set of doors, the one closest to the and going out, go out the double doors. Okay?
Gotcha.
Also, next week, I'm going to warn you now, next week we will have to be in class until 8:30 both nights. We have our accreditors here. And they are evaluating the school to renew our accreditation. So they may even come into class and want to talk to you. And in the process, they may or may not even throw me out. But that they might. There's no guarantee. The last time I went through these, it was like it never happened. I never even saw the evaluators. So I don't know what's going to happen next week, but we have been asked to make sure that everybody understands class will go until 8:30. Okay. All righty, thank you all. We'll see you on Wednesday. Have a nice couple of days. Yes, ma'am. Who's that?
I was just gonna ask, I like it because no one see. Because he brought us like, how can you see with that thing? I'm like,
This you actually refresh it.
yeah. Like I can see that. It's just all that.
If they start asking me questions, I'm gonna be like, yeah, there's one thing wrong with
Okay.
I can make the most ridiculous question. And I can make
Or did she open it? I don't know, I just got the first question. I put it's like a few years ago. Because I put each question. And I haven't turned it in because I use it on my board. And I remember she has shown the highlighter last week of grammar. Yeah.
You.
Yeah. It just
So-
depends.
I hope that doesn't happen. If that happens, you do belong.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to inform that in case I
Okay,
had to leave.
well, I'm glad you told me.
I feel like some websites.
So keep me apprised.
We can have one, right? Oh, yeah, I've got like 5 or 6 references on there. Anything that I put on there that was,